Eagle 6 in the turn.
Roger.
Viper 1 bombs away. One's going to climb high above 20 east to south.
Eagle 6 radar contact. Eagle 6 is visual.
Planet goes left.
Hello there, and welcome back to the DCS SITREP, the show on all things DCS world related. DCS, it's the premier combat flight simulator for the home PC if you're not familiar, and it is designed and developed by Eagle Dynamics, and I'm your host Prickly Hedgehog. For this week's DCS SITREP number 17, today we talk about the F-4E Phantom II by Heatblur Simulations, which dropped as part of a big patch this week. That patch featured a number of interesting changes, and we'll talk about a few of those coming up here. But before we do that, let's begin with the Phantom II, which has been in development for more than 2 years and suffered several delays and setbacks before finally arriving this week, much to the excitement of the community. Like you though, I've only had a few evenings since its release to get a good look at the aircraft, and my early impressions can't possibly be comprehensive or realistic. It would certainly be insulting to the development team to assemble a review in just a few nights of flying, when it's taken years of hard work to produce this incredible rendition of an iconic Cold War stalwart. We'll come back to my raw impressions in just a second, but let's take a look at what ED said in the blurb this week in the newsletter on the Phantom II.
LA Center, Heat 1.
So they're saying here that the F-4E first flew on the 30th of June 1967 and entered service in 1968, so yes, just in time for the Vietnam War. It became the most numerous version built with 1,397 examples manufactured. The E is distinguishable over other variants by its internal centerline 20mm M61A1 Vulcan cannon with 640 odd rounds to shoot. In addition to the internal cannon, the F-4E includes an impressive variety of air-to-air and air-to-ground weaponry. In air-to-air combat, the F-4E can employ both radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow and infrared-guided AIM-97 Sidewinder missiles. The F-4E is a very powerful fighter, and in the right hands can be a potent dogfight adversary. In the air-to-ground role, the F-4E offers a wide array of unguided bombs, rockets, and guided munitions. These include the AGM-65 Maverick, 62 Walleye, and the Radar Seeker AGM-45 Shrike. That actually was a fairly small warhead, and of course that weapon was eventually replaced by the HARM system that is in use today for SEED type activities. Now, Heatblur created a deep simulation of the F-4E radar and the PAVE spike targeting pod that accurately mimics the operation strengths and weaknesses of those particular systems. They also updated, as many of you are aware, the Jester AI system and has expanded and improved upon it to provide unique and intuitive means to work with your AI weapons system officer, or WISO, in the back seat, whether you're engaging in historical missions, testing your skills in dogfights, or simply enjoying the power of the beast. The F-4E delivers an amazing level of detail, and I think that's a fairly accurate blurb on what we've got from Heatblur. Now remember too, for Steam users, there is a 7-day period in which you can take advantage of a 20% discount on your purchase of the F-4E Phantom II, and that is as a thank you to the dedicated community and support and patience. Remember that there were several delays in getting this aircraft out. Now make sure if you are a Steam user, you do buy the right key through Steam. There are other platforms in which you can buy it, obviously through the eStore, but it's also available on at least it was this week, as a discount through the Heatblur store as well. So don't mix up your keys, because you may not be able to redeem them depending on which platform that you're using. So let's talk about what I've experienced, my raw impressions, which are very, very favorable. As is typical of Heatblur products, visually the aircraft is exquisite. We've got high levels of detail recreated on the exterior and also the interior of both seats in the aircraft. I spent most of my time in the front seat though, and in VR, it looks absolutely stunning. I was particularly impressed with the glass for the radar screen. Looking through the Pimax crystal, it looks extremely realistic, and the jet is awash with dozens of banks of dials, it seems, and knobs and switches, as you'd expect from an analog jet fighter of this vintage. It is, on that basis, extremely hands-on, and I think for the flight purists who are averse to things like HUDs and MFDs and enjoy a more instrumental interaction to flying aircraft like this, it's going to appeal. Where aircraft like the F-16 can feel sort of more remote and precise in basic flight, the Phantom II requires, I guess, a much more persistent interaction with the primary gauges. You're connected much more directly with the flight controls, and it actually takes some real work and attention to flight instruments like the Cyclops-like eyeball of the ADI in front of you to keep the jet pointing on flight path. Definitely a little bit more work involved. Indeed, without the electronic HUD, flying in clouds and certainly at night, which is difficult even with the most modern aids, can quickly become disorientating. So again, it requires some concentration. And also further, the danger of heads down monkeying with the instruments becomes really quite a legitimate hazard as you get used to the jet. And that's going to require a lot of procedural configuration well before you embark on critical maneuvers like landing. So get your jet set up, because it's very easy to get heads down in the cockpit, looking at scrolling dials and looking at instruments and not flying the jet, which is a critical fault in the real world. That ignores the 80-20 rule. Remember, 80% outside of the aircraft, 20% in. So cockpit setup, therefore, is going to be, well, like all new aircraft, a bit of a thing for those more serious enthusiasts wanting to get to grips with the simpler aircraft of an older age. So you're going to need to get your controls set up so you avoid some of that heads down stuff. At this juncture, I haven't had time to deploy weapons, so I'm not going to show you any videos of me doing that, but I have been impressed with the tutorials and missions across the various maps, which are a great kickoff point to get to learn the jet and its various systems. I really enjoyed the penetration landing tutorial, did that a couple of times last night. That really does demand some precision flying, and again, I think this will appeal to enthusiasts of the jet who also enjoy that instrumentation flying process. One thing that does catch you out is the nose authority on it and making sure you're trimmed correctly, so you will need to trim regularly. I was not expecting how obstructive too the long nose is on landing, which I think gives it a similar feel to the MiG-21. It is a fast jet, of course. The J79 engines, they spew that smudgy trademark trail of smoke as it hurtles through the air with a characteristic whine distinctive to the famous aircraft. I love how it looks parked with the canopies open and rolling down the taxiway with the canopies open too. Gives a sense of drama and aesthetic appeal. It really is a good looking jet. It's such an unusual jet in many respects, with those tails sections particularly pointing down. It is quite a visceral looking piece of equipment. Now, it's far too early to deliver more of a precise review, and on that basis any criticism. I would like to see a cleaned up interior for those wanting maybe a newer looking aircraft. Say if you're flying it in, I don't know, 1970, for example, and you don't have, you know, a jet that's 40 years old or 50 years old or whatever it is, that's been pulled out of a museum. Although I have to say the work that they've done is amazing, but I think sometimes this scanning and photogrammetry stuff is so good at capturing the age of some of these museum documented examples. It's almost too perfect in doing that. So I would like to see perhaps a cleaned up cockpit, and I know some people offered that for the F-14. That came up as a discussion when the F-14 was released as well. A small minor aesthetic thing really, but just something to consider. Overall though, wow, the arrival of the Phantom II, it's really a welcome aircraft. It adds to the growing list of aircraft that we have in the franchise. It's a great era-specific aircraft, which is going to boost a lot of mission opportunities and scenarios and conflicts within the game that a lot of players will be looking forward to. And that's going to allow for some fantastic flying opportunities within the game. So let me know what you think of the arrival of the Phantom, whether you picked one up or whether you're deciding to wait a little bit more for some reviews and some better examples of the aircraft flying. And let me know if that's your thing or why you haven't picked it up. because I know there are a few people that are more interested in other aircraft, and I'm always curious to see why that is. Yeah, but overall, I think it's been a really good release, even though it was delayed, and it's good to see the Phantom in the game in all its flying glory.
Copy 1, loud and clear, VFR at 14.5, we're now standard. Copy 1-1, checkmate.
As I mentioned, we had a pretty decent patch this week, which brought us the Phantom, but there was also a long list of fixes, improvements, and additions from the ED team in that latest patch. Now, some highlights included the Masson Asset Pack, which added numerous buildings, vehicles, and fortifications, which we mentioned last week. And thanks to Masson for reaching out and clarifying a couple of things in terms of color schemes and things that will represent various factions, if you like, or air forces and things in that pack. Now, they've also here said that they've fixed the jet wash effect, which wasn't showing for your own aircraft. They've also corrected the Mark 80 series of bombs and models and the fuse animation. They've also added the G warm-up option, the gameplay settings. So if it's enabled, this will allow the aircraft to be already G warmed if the mission starts in the air. If the mission is on the ground, that is, it's a cold start, ramp, hot, or runway start, the player will still have to perform a G warm-up. So a nice little addition there. Big news here was listed underneath the F-16 update, and that is the Sniper Advanced Targeting Pod is in active development for release later this year. Now, many of you will say it's about time, of course. This will be a very, very popular item from numerous members of the community, and I believe that once the pod is implemented, it should be available for aircraft like the F-15E as well, although I suspect this will be very dependent on the onboarding of the RASBAM team for production updates on the Striegel and their other products. That is in regards to the MiG-19 that they have in game, and the Strike Eagle, the Mirage, and the Harrier. And at this time, it doesn't look like we have further development, or at least publicly released information about how that process is going, because it is a behind closed doors scene. Now, getting back to the changelog, Apache modeling has included now the animation of equipment behind the service hatches. There is an open key binding for that listed under service hatches, so you'll have to create your own key binding. A nice little touch, and the aircraft also received the FCR zoom functions that WAGS has been showcasing recently as well. So good news for Apache fans. While we're on the subject of that, I do need to make an apology and correction from last week's episode, in which I indicated, I guess, that there would be an ability to talk to the Apache via the Kiowa through some sort of link system. Now, according to various commentators, it was pointed out to me that such a system never existed. Now, I have read literature regarding the L2 MUM system that hinted that there was a possibility to use link of some kind to whatever system that is. It's not Link 16, but it is a system which allows the aircraft to talk to unmanned systems. But I had presumably incorrectly interpreted that as being a direct link to, say, the Apache. Now, that's not the case, it sounds like, and I am incorrect. So I apologize for any misleading information about that. The two aircraft are capable of working together, and we saw that with a recent video from Casmo, but there is no sort of data linking between the two where the Kiowa can share its targets with the Apache via an electronic transmission system or modem system between the two aircraft. They do that through coordinated comms work, as I said, rather than a data link sharing system per se. Now, while we're talking about the Kiowa, Polychop revealed that they are on the cusp of releasing the helicopter on the heels of the Phantom 2, and they released a video on that. And also this explains perhaps why Casmo has been busy dropping a few videos on the Kiowa as well, showcasing the work that we've seen. It will arrive therefore in time for the Afghanistan map, which is slated for release in June, I believe, if everything goes still according to plan. And that will also be part of the Chinook, which is going to be released in June as well. So we've got a lot of work coming towards us in terms of mission sets and airframes being able to work on these various platforms, which is going to be cool. Remember too that we have the Iraq map down the line here as well. So it's a very busy time for Eagle Dynamics and a busy time for us to get our heads around all of these different modules, how we're going to use them and whether or not we need them all or not. That's, I guess a personal preference and a budget one. For some people, it's a little overwhelming. So based on the comments that I'm seeing. Now, as mentioned, most of the aircraft in the game received updates, aside from some conspicuously absent ones involving RASBAM. And with the release of the Cola map a few weeks ago, it wasn't surprising to see several fixes for that map, which was positive. It included new various small villages, added in various locations, renaming some airfields to their correct names, and some other quality of life adjustments like brakes and roads and things like that. We didn't see just yet, and I know it is coming, a winter version of the map, and hopefully we'll get that in-game here soon as well. Now, I mentioned that the South Atlantic team are still tweaking that space, and I think the mention of that sparked some thoughts among the community about whether or not RASBAM therefore was back working with ED. Now, it's important to note that the map team is separate from the aircraft teams, and the conflict that was going on between RASBAM and Eagle Dynamics centered more on the aircraft, particularly the F-15, based on the comments that were kind of leaked out by some of the development team there. So I'm not going to make any more speculative accusations or assumptions. I think we'll need to let the two teams sort that out. But like I said, the map team are separate, I understand, from the aircraft teams, and that is what has allowed the tweaks to occur for the South Atlantic map. What they did, while we're talking about that team, is made some adjustments to the trees and also broadened the variety of vegetation available within the trees, while also they deepened the channel by Bluff Cove and the Falklands to allow shipping to traverse, and I think oil tanker stuff they pulled out of the game because it wasn't working. So as I said, this doesn't constitute a full return of the RASBAM team to working on other modules. We'll have to wait and see whether or not the work continues on the F-15E particularly, which is their newest aircraft, as well as the Mirage, as well as the Harrier, and also the MiG-19, which is one of their older aircraft. And of course they had, prior to the split, if you like, or the dust up, there was hints about the MiG-23, and all that seems to be a little bit on hold right now as we wait for the two teams to ratify their differences. Yeah, a little bit of a rough time with regards to that, and I think the longer this rumbles on too, there's going to be a lot of catch-up work right now, where I think we're about 2 patches at least since the RASBAM team included any work on the aircraft modules. So the longer that goes on, the more problems we may see with some of the aircraft coming up. So hopefully this gets resolved fairly soon.
291.6, copy 11, question.
Now, as expected with big patches like this, we did see a large number of campaigns which also received fixes, tweaks, and updates to reflect improvements to both the core game engine and also updates to various aircraft, which allows for different things to be corrected, fixed, or needed to be fixed, as is often the way. With the arrival of the Phantom 2, we will all be eager to see some sort of campaign to embellish our flying experiences with that aircraft. Reflected Simulations has already indicated he will be doing some sort of Top Gun curriculum style campaign, similar to what he did with Speed and Angels and also Zone 5 with the F-14 Tomcat. So I'm looking forward to that no end, and he's been doing a lot of research to bring that campaign to life. So stay tuned for more information on that when it comes to hand. I had a request to do some sort of update on various third-party modules like the MiG-17 by Red Star Simulations, for example. Indeed, I do keep an occasional eye on these projects, but for now I don't really have a whole lot of great information for you. I suspect this is because of the very busy schedule right now with all the other modules like the Phantom 2, the Kiowa, the Chinook, and several pending maps, which we just talked about. And I think that's going to strangle out attention for some of these World War II aircraft, for example, like the LA-7 by Octopus G. Mostly, though, I don't really have a whole lot of intel on progress to sprinkle into this week's SITREP. But like I said, I regularly check the other project development, try to keep abreast of what's going on there. Some of those smaller teams are working very diligently, but they just don't have time to bring in regular updates as to where they are up to. And so it's a little bit of a slower news cycle with those teams. But stay tuned. I'll update as soon as I have something tangible, or certainly something worth talking about. Sometimes it'll just be a screenshot that they have of an early baked rendering, and maybe even a few shots, but sometimes that's not really enough to really promote discussion on. It's just to showcase that they're still working on things. I prefer a little bit more tangible information to at least talk about or analyze in terms of figuring out progress and what things are going to look like and how the team are working on their particular area. So on that basis too, now that the Phantom 2 is out, I've seen a lot of people wondering, okay, great, and when are we going to get the F-14D? When are we now going to see the Eurofighter and of course the A6 and all of this as well? Somewhere down the line here, we just don't know, but we'll let the Heatblur team bask in the glory of releasing the Phantom 2, and of course there will be fixes and patch updates, I'm sure, on that in the coming cycles as the team gets feedback, as they get more time to breathe now and enjoy the fruits of their labor. And again, the community gives them feedback on things that they're experiencing with the aircraft. That brings us to the end of this week's SITREP. Let me know what you think of the Phantom 2 and this week's patch. Thanks for the unending support, comments, corrections, and advice. I appreciate it all. I'm human. Sometimes I make mistakes, so I appreciate any feedback that I get. It helps the channel chug along too, and if you'd like to help keep the channel chugging along, don't forget to like, subscribe, share. If you really like this week's content, don't forget the super thanks button as well. That really helps this little channel keep rolling along. We'll make that do. Thanks again. We'll see you next time on the DCS SITREP. This is Privy Hedgehog out. Cheers.